I used to think maybe something was wrong with me, that if I smiled more, spoke less, worked harder, he'd love me. Maybe then he'd look at me the way he looked at my brothers, with pride, with warmth. But no matter what I did, I remained invisible to him. My name is Lena, and for most of my childhood, I was just background noise in my own family. My father, Martin Cruz, wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. He didn't yell, he didn't hit, he didn't have to. His silence carried more weight than any insult could. When I brought home straight A's in 5th grade, he barely looked up from his newspaper, but when Derek, my older brother, passed algebra after failing it twice, Dad clapped him on the back like he'd won a national championship. That's my bye, he'd said I was 10. That was the first time I really noticed, but the moment I'll never forget was Father's Day. I'd spent my entire Saturday working on a handmade card. I cut the edges into scallops, drew little stars around the border, even wrote a poem inside. You work so hard and never rest, but in my eyes you're still the best. After dinner, heart pounding, I handed it to him with both hands. He took it without looking up, muttered thanks, and placed it on the coffee table while keeping his eyes glued to the Cowboys game. 5 minutes later, Zane, my younger brother, waltzed in with a mug from the dollar store. It read 1-1. Dad held it up like it was a trophy, laughed and said, "Now that's a real gift." I stood there, card still in my hand. Watching them from the corner of the room, I kept smiling, too proud, or maybe too ashamed to walk away. My mom gave me a gentle pat on the back, whispered something like, "He doesn't mean it," but I knew better. He did mean it, and that hurt more than anything else. This was the rhythm of our home, Derek with his touchdowns, Zane with his charm, and me. I wrote stories, drew pictures, stayed in my room. Quiet, overlooked, trying not to take up too much space, trying not to want too much. I learned to shrink myself before anyone had to tell me to applaud others and hide my own hands. That night I sat on my bed, card in my lap, glitter smudged by tears I wouldn't let fall. That was the night I realized love wasn't blind, it just chose not to see me. Derek was the athlete, Zane was the talker, and me, I was the one who refilled the water pitchers and cleaned up after everyone else. In our house, talent had a spotlight, but only if it could be cheered from a bleacher or toasted over beers. Derek was built like a varsity poster, tall, broad-shouldered, with a natural swagger that made Dad beam at every school game I'd watch from the stands, feet cold on metal bleachers, while Dad shouted his lungs out every time Derek made a tackle. The way he looked at him, it was like watching a man salute a hero. Then there was Zane, younger than me by 2 years, but born with a silver tongue. He could charm the neighbors, the teachers, even the cashier at the local gas station. Dad called him the closer, like he was already some Fortune 500 deal maker. Zane once convinced a teacher to give him an extra week on a project, one he hadn't even started. When Dad found out, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his beer. "That's my boy," he said again. That phrase I used to lie in bed and mouth it to myself, just to see how it would sound coming my way. I wasn't lazy. I studied, entered art contests, even helped tutor Zane once when he forgot how to write a thesis statement. I asked Dad once, just once, for a new sketchbook. Not some expensive brand, just a simple pad of thick paper. He didn't look up from his laptop. "What's the point?" he said flatly. "You'll quit halfway like everything else." I felt my stomach fold into itself. I hadn't quit anything, but I had learned not to ask again. At dinner, they talked about Derek's next big game, Zane's newest prank or charm story. Dad leaned in, engaged, laughing. When I spoke up, it was like I'd turned on the TV during a serious conversation. A tight smile, a polite nod. And then back to the stars of the show. That night I stared at the ceiling for hours, not crying, not angry, just silent. I stopped hoping he'd see me and started planning how to make him unable to look away. By the time I left for college, I'd perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight, while Derek celebrated his athletic scholarship with a backyard BBQ, and Zane got a new car after landing an internship through Dad's golf buddy. I packed my things into a second-hand suitcase and caught a rideshare to Austin. No send-off. No photos, just a dry, good luck kid from Dad, as he shut the front door behind me. At first, college was just a place to exist, quietly. I stuck to the corners of lecture halls, juggled 2 part-time jobs, and ate more instant noodles than I care to admit. But somewhere between class and exhaustion, something started to shift. It began with a group project gone sideways, a logistics app idea that everyone gave up on. Everyone but me. Late one night, I reopened the files on my old laptop and started sketching wireframes by hand. I didn't know how to code. I didn't even know what UI stood for, but I knew how to learn. And I knew what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, and invisible. If I could build something to help people like me, small business owners, independent workers, those with no spotlight, maybe I'd matter in a way no one could ignore. I named it quietly Threadline. The name came from my sketchbook margins where I'd always drawn invisible threads connecting one thing to another, silent, unseen. But holding everything together, the first version crashed. The second was worse. A mentor ghosted me after 2 meetings. Investors smiled, nodded, and never emailed back. I taught myself code through forums and YouTube at 2 a.m. Fixed bugs while sipping cold coffee in thrift store hoodies and pitched to empty rooms in student centers. No one clapped. No one cheered back home. Derek's face appeared on local sports pages. Zane's LinkedIn boomed with new titles. On my feed, I saw Dad posing with both of them at a business expo. In the middle arms around his sons was the man who had once told me I'd quit everything I started. I turned off my phone, put my head down, and kept working. They never saw the late nights, they never saw the failures, they never saw the hunger, but one day they'd see everything. It happened by accident, like most turning points do. I was sitting in the back of a downtown co-working space, sipping stale coffee and trying to stay awake during a small investor Q&A. Most of the pitches were predictable food apps. Fitness, crypto nonsense. But then someone mentioned logistics infrastructure and my ears perked up. A panelist, older, sharp-eyed, with a voice that could slice through glass, leaned into his mic. We're quietly looking to acquire small to mid-size regional freight firms. Outdated systems aging, leadership, lots of upside. He rattled off a few names. I froze when I heard one, Crossmark Logistics. That was Dad's company. I recognized it instantly. He'd worked there my whole life, started in operations, climbed the ladder, bragged about running the place like it was his own kingdom. I remembered overhearing phone calls growing up, him barking orders, telling people how things should be done. But I also remembered the stress, the late nights, the way he'd curse the outdated systems and budget freezes. And now, they were on someone's radar. A vulnerability. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching Crossmark. Was a mid-sized freight firm with a decaying digital backbone and leadership on the verge of retirement. Exactly the kind of company a startup could absorb without much noise, especially if it came through a shell partner. I reached out to a quiet investor I'd met months ago. Someone who believed in Threadline but needed proof of power. I gave him proof. We formed a holding entity under his name. I poured in everything I had. My savings, my early revenue, my sweat. I knew it was risky. I also knew it was personal. 1 month later, he called me with 3 words. They've accepted the offer. I stared at my apartment ceiling for a long time that night. The quiet hum of my radiator was the only sound in the room. My hands trembled as I opened the email purchase terms. Transition plan. Onboarding timeline. It was real. I clicked the final page, scrolled to the signature block, and typed out a name I hadn't used since I was 14. Lena Ramirez. I signed the contract under a different name because they never cared to ask who I'd become. I stopped showing up. No calls, no birthdays, no holiday dinners. When Mom texted in the family group chat, Thanksgiving potluck at 4, I let the message sit unread. When Zane got engaged, I sent a polite congrats and nothing more. No one followed up. No one asked where I was. It was easier that way. They assumed I was still floating in the background somewhere, still the quiet one, still figuring things out. In reality, I was working 18-hour days out of a borrowed co-working cubicle on the east side of Austin. I ate from food trucks, answered emails at laundromats, and slept with a notebook beside me because my brain wouldn't stop sketching platform fixes at 2 a.m. Threadline finally caught traction. A small cafe chain used it to streamline their deliveries. Then a florist, then a boutique furniture company. One client turned into 10. 10 turned into 50. I hired a freelance developer, then a part-time account rep. Our revenue graph bent upward slowly but surely. One evening after signing our first 5-figure contract, I walked into a dealership, not to test drive, not to daydream, to buy. I paid cash for a matte black SUV with heated seats and 0 miles on the odometer. The salesman raised an eyebrow when I handed him the check under the name Lena Ramirez. 2 weeks later, I signed the lease on a glass-walled office downtown. It wasn't big, just 2 rooms and a view of the street, but it had my name on the mailbox. I stood in the middle of it the first night, barefoot, floor dusty, and lights buzzing overhead, and let myself cry for exactly 60 seconds. Then I got back to work. My brothers still posted photos, Zane with his fiancée in Cabo, Derek coaching a little league team like a suburban hero. Dad beamed in every shot, arms around them like they were trophies. Not once did anyone ask what I was doing. Not once did they notice I'd gone. That's the thing about being invisible for so long. When you finally step out of frame, no one sees you leave. They thought I vanished, but I was rising far beyond their reach. It started with a message from Mom in the family group chat. Dinner for Dad's 60th this Sunday. Everyone brings something, Zane replied with a thumbs up. Derek sent a steak emoji. A few scattered jokes followed, then silence. I stared at the screen for a while. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, heart beating louder than it should have. Then I typed 2 simple words, I'll be there. No one responded. The silence didn't hurt, not anymore. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't expected. I was a ghost until I wasn't the night before dinner. I returned to the dealership, the same one where I bought my SUV in silence. This time, I wasn't there for the car. I was there to pick up the official ownership documents polished and signed. Threadline, operating under Ramirez Holdings, had officially acquired Crossmark Logistics, my father's company. I drove home in silence, the documents sealed in a black envelope resting on the passenger seat. It was heavier than it should have been, like it carried not just ink and paper, but every night I'd been overlooked, every insult disguised as a joke, every "you'll quit anyway" echoing in my bones. I laid out my outfit carefully that night. Nothing flashy, clean lines, crisp collar. Confidence wasn't in the fabric, it was in the posture. In the morning, I placed the envelope in my bag keys, in my coat pocket, and paused at the door. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about making them sorry. It was about showing them what they never bothered to see. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. The house looked the same. Same stone walkway, same porch lights flickering slightly. Same scent of overcooked meat and cologne that clung to family dinners. I parked the SUV just far enough down the street that they wouldn't notice it right away. Not yet, inside the laughter had already begun. Zane was holding court in the kitchen, mimicking a co-worker's accent, while Derek doubled over laughing. Dad Martin stood at the grill like a war general, beer in hand. Chest puffed. When I stepped through the door, the energy shifted just enough to notice. Well, Martin said, raising an eyebrow. Look who finally decided to show up. A few polite hellos. A nod from Mom. I smiled calm and took my seat near the end of the long dining table. I placed the black envelope on my lap under the napkin. No one asked about it. Dinner rolled out like a script we'd all memorized. Zane talked about a promotion, Derek shared a coaching win. Dad clapped and laughed, beaming like a proud sponsor of greatness. The air was thick with smoked ribs and ego. Then came the toast. Martin stood up, raising his glass. To my sons, he said, grinning. To Derek, still making me proud on and off the field. To Zane, closing deals before lunch and charming the board by dinner. They clinked their glasses. Then he looked at me and to Lena. He paused for dramatic effect, smiling like he was about to deliver a punchline. Still out there, figuring it out, huh? Laughter. Soft at first, then louder. Even Mom smiled, though hers faded quickly when she glanced my way. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I just let the silence wash over me like armor. Because in that moment I realized something. He still thought I was the same girl he'd ignored, The same invisible daughter who begged for approval with glitter cards and straight A's. He had no idea who was sitting at the table across from him. I stood up slowly, my hands steady, as I moved the envelope to the top of my plate. Not to be heard, but to be remembered. I actually brought something for you, I said, placing the envelope on the table in front of him. Laughter quieted. Zane paused mid-sip. Derek raised an eyebrow. Dad looked at the envelope like it was an unfamiliar object. What is this? A resume, he chuckled. I didn't answer. I turned and walked toward the front door, letting the silence follow me like a shadow. From the driveway, I pressed the remote key. The SUV headlights flared to life, sleek black, impossible to miss. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the ignition just enough for the engine to purr, and backed it slowly into the center of the driveway where everyone could see. Then I stepped out, heels clicking against the concrete like punctuation marks, and walked back into the dining room with the key fob in one hand. Thought you said you were still figuring things out, Zane muttered. I smiled. For you, Dad, I said simply, placing the key fob next to the envelope. Happy birthday. He looked down confused, then glanced out the window at the car. Wait, you bought that? Derek asked, leaning forward. Dad picked up the envelope and began unfolding the papers inside. His expression didn't change at first. He skimmed the first page, then the second. Then his brow furrowed, his lips parted slightly. What is this? He asked, eyes darting across the page. Crossmark. I folded my arms. Keep reading. Zane leaned over his shoulder. Is this a joke? Derek stood up. Wait, this says wait, no way. Dad looked up slowly, his face drained of its usual bluster. This says you're the new principal owner of Crossmark Logistics, yes, I said softly. Through a holding company. We finalized the acquisition last week, but... He blinked. That's where I work. I nodded. Not anymore. The room went still like someone had sucked all the air out. The only sound was the soft buzz of the dining room light. I built Threadline from the ground up. I acquired Crossmark because it was vulnerable, mismanaged, and available. You once said I'd quit halfway. I didn't. I finished. Derek opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. Zane looked like he'd swallowed ice. Dad's hands trembled as he set the papers down. You work for me now, I said quietly. Technically, I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I turned, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I didn't need their approval. I had something better. I walked out without a word. The shouting behind me was just noise. The front door slammed shut behind me, but inside the silence stretched like a noose. Martin sat frozen at the head of the table, the ownership documents trembling in his hands. His lips moved, but no sound came out, just the faint rhythm of disbelief. Derek was the first to speak. This has to be a mistake, right? Zane leaned over their father's shoulder, scanning the fine print. It's real, he said. Voice hollow, the company name, the signatures, the transfers done. Martin dropped the papers onto the table like they burned him. She can't just take over, he said, voice cracking. That company is mine. I built that, no, Zane said quietly. You worked there, you didn't own it. Derek sank back into his chair, jaw tight. She owns everything now. Martin stared down at his hands like they belonged to someone else, but she was never serious. She never wanted this. She was always drawing, writing, wasting time. Apparently not, Zane muttered. Martin looked up slowly, the edges of his pride fraying. Why didn't I know? How could she do all this without us knowing? Zane laughed short, bitter. Because none of us ever asked. Derek looked down at his plate untouched. She didn't ask for help. She didn't need permission. Martin's voice dropped to a whisper. She didn't ask. She just took it. The words hung there heavy, and then the weight of it all began to crash down. Martin's kingdom, his pride, his reputation. The carefully sculpted legacy he thought he'd pass on to his sons had been quietly bought, sealed, and delivered by the daughter he barely acknowledged, the one he'd called a loser. The one who never fought for the spotlight because she was too busy building the stage. The brothers looked at each other, then back at the doorway I had walked through. For the first time in their lives, they weren't looking past me. They were looking up at me. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of my downtown office. The air was quiet, clean, untouched. Just like my life now, I unlocked the glass door, stepped inside, and walked across the polished concrete floor. My heels echoed softly, steady, and sure. The nameplate had just been installed beside the entrance. Lena Ramirez, CEO, not Cruz. Not the name that reminded me of birthday dinners where I was invisible. Not the name that rolled so easily off their tongues when they were praising Derek or Zane. This name was mine, chosen, earned. I walked to my desk, placed my phone down, and exhaled. No missed calls, no texts from my father, not even from my brothers. They were probably still sitting in the quiet ruins of last night, trying to piece together how the girl they ignored had rewritten the script without telling them. I used to dream about that moment, my father calling to apologize. My brothers admitting they were wrong, but the truth. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their words because I had my voice now. And it was louder in silence than theirs ever was in noise. People say revenge is sweet, but what I felt wasn't revenge, it was freedom. The kind of peace that comes when you stop asking to be seen and start living like you were never invisible to begin with. Everything I had built, Threadline, the acquisition, the black SUV parked outside, wasn't for them. It was for the girl I used to be, the one who stayed quiet at the dinner table, who clutched glittery cards. No one read, who cried behind locked doors because she couldn't understand why love felt so far away. She deserved this life. She deserved to win. I looked out the window, watching the city wake up, and felt nothing but clarity. I didn't take their throne. I built my own, and I never looked back. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? If this story hit close to home, hit subscribe. We've got more like it coming.